Today, I want to talk about a symphony that changed the history of music. It took the world from what we called the classical period into a new one, which we now call the Romantic period. I'm talking about, of course, Beethoven's Third Symphony, Opus 55, the Eroica in E flat. And this symphony just was so massive in every respect. But before I play you some excerpts of it and talk about the music itself, maybe a little bit of context is interesting here. It was written between 1803 and 1804 in Vienna. And we have to imagine the world at this period. The Industrial Revolution was really underway. There was a new group of people who could begin to afford products which previously they couldn't possibly buy because the manufacturing processes were too labor intensive. And these factories were being built all around Europe, across the world, in America. And these factories obviously gave off a lot of smoke, made a lot of noise, they changed the landscape. People were moving from the countryside into the cities, into the places where these factories were. And they were noisy and smelly and dirty. And now the rivers and streams were being polluted, not just with biomass, but with all sorts of weird and wonderful and strange concoctions in large quantities. And the artists of this time, the painters, the poets, were reacting to this, and they were trying to reconnect with nature. We had had two revolutions. Kings and queens had been thrown out, beheaded, families wiped out. There was a new era. And in this massive change and time, they wanted to connect the Romanticism, as we call now, or Romanticism as we call it now. They were really connecting with the wonder of the universe, the wonder of the nature. Not everything had to be about Christianity and about God. And Beethoven found himself at this period of his life, which is sometimes called the beginning of the middle period of his career, at this period of his life, contemplating these big things. And if you had heard Beethoven's First and Second Symphony, but not heard any of his other music, and then compared it to the great symphonist Joseph Haydn, who was born in 1732 and who wrote 104 symphonies, the last one being written more or less 10 years earlier in 1795, the number 104 in D major. He must have thought, Joseph Haydn that is, that he'd taken the symphonic form just about as far as it could possibly go. Of course, we mustn't forget Mozart with his 41 symphonies, where he uses the forms and structures that Haydn had sort of created and embellished and did his genius work around them. But Symphony No. 3, Beethoven, changes it all. For a start, it's nearly twice as long as Haydn's last symphony. It's almost the same length as Beethoven's First Symphony and Second Symphony combined. It uses powerful fortes and pianissimos, loud sections and quiet sections. And because of all of these things, its scale, its grandeur, it set the way forward. And what's more, because of this new money that's floating around and a new audience, it allowed Beethoven to build this audience. And consequently, there were concert halls being built all over Europe. So these were kind of rivaling the opera houses, which were the popular thing. And it was indeed these concert halls that would be filled now with big orchestras, massive orchestras with choirs and the need of conductors to hold it all together. But let's get started. Unlike my video on Sibelius's Third Symphony, where I compared the performance from one conductor to another, for simplicity, I have just chosen one conductor for this talk. I will put in the description below many links to other great performances, modern, new and old. But I have chosen Herbert von Karajan. Von Karajan, the great Austrian conductor who conducted the Berlin Philharmonic for 34 years and was a very a brilliant man, but very, very ambitious and a perfectionist. And he wanted to get the perfect sound out of his orchestra. He had this idea of how it should be. He even used to conduct with his eyes closed so that he could hear and pick up the sounds of the orchestra. And he recorded it, the complete set of symphonies, 4 times, and some of the symphonies more than that. And I'm going to pick up not the very first recording, but the second one in 1943. Now, what's inspired this video is the fact that I was invited by a very kind man to visit him and to go through a record collection that he had recently inherited. And he said I could take whatever I liked. And I found the first 53 version of Beethoven 3 and the 63, 10 years later, and the 77. So with those 3, I had nearly everything, except he recorded it again just before, a few years before he died in 1985 using digital technology. So I think he wasn't so much as redoing them all because he wanted something else to say, to take it much faster or slower. No, it was because the technology every 10 years was evolving so much that he knew that the wonderful sounds he could get from the orchestra could be captured so much better. And indeed, the first one from 43 is with the Philharmonia Orchestra, recorded for Columbia, Philharmonia from London. And then the next ones were all with the Berlin Philharmonic. So let's just take this record out of its... I find this really exciting. This is where LPs for me are fabulous, because this is a piece of history. I mean, it really is incredible. I mean, this is not in the most perfect condition. It's being played very heavily. It's on the Columbia label, as I say. Its symphony will open with 2 chords, 2 big forte chords, boom, boom, and then it will go straight in to the first theme, piano. And this is typical of the Romantic period. It didn't mean lovey-dovey, it meant passion and energy. It meant about composers expressing how they feel, how they really are, and it wasn't... That's what it means, and Beethoven did it. And he started it. He was the very first, and it was personified obviously in the 5th Symphony later on. But let's first of all go to this one. Now, the 2 chords. Coming soon. Excuse the crackles and the pops. Now, I was discussing with the conductor Michel Tilkan a little while ago, what is it about Beethoven? And Michel said, well, I love conducting Beethoven because there's a tune around every corner. There's just so many great tunes, and it's absolutely right. You know, and he was the master of the melody, but it's the creations that he did and the passion and the energy. I want you to listen to this opening one more time, because there's going to be something very significant about it. I want you to hear the 2 bars again, the 2 chords, and listen to how that melody comes in. And let's just do it one more time. Right, here we go. Here we come. Notice that melody comes straight in. It's on the cellos. They're playing an E flat, and they're leading it whilst the other strings are going ta 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 ta. Right? Now, let's compare that with the 63 recording and see if you can hear the point I want to make, because it's an important point. Let's make sure I put the right side on. Right. Here we go. The two chords first. Now, did you hear a difference? Firstly, the two opening bars, the two opening chords are recorded wider. I don't know if my microphones here will pick that up, but if you listen to it, you'll see it's a bigger sound. And you'll also hear that that very first note on the cellos is slightly understated. In the 53 version, it's ba-da-da. Here is that ba is not quite so hard and slightly, feels like it's slightly delayed, but it's still there. But the most important thing is not that. It's something else. And to illustrate that, I'm going to flip over to my wonderful streaming device, and this is where they come into play, not only because of their quality, although I have to say that some of the quality of the streaming is really bad. I don't know why it is. It's really best if you can get the CDs made from them. It will give a much better sound. But let's just first of all play again the 63 version. Ready? Let's just zoom it in. Okay, now listen to the 53 version. Do you hear the pitch difference? The 53 version is lower. I'll play it again. Here's the 63. And here's the 53. Da, 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 da. And then if I listen to the 85 version, here we go. Compare that with this. Now, I've seen on the internet people saying, oh, it might be about the technology and the records. And actually, I think it is the fact that the symphony orchestra was tuned at a lower pitch. Please correct me if you have proof to known otherwise, but I honestly think that the concertmaster, the first violinist, in those days used, and still today, chooses the pitch at which the orchestra will be tuned. And although there was a kind of universal agreement in 1929 that A440 would be the pitch, orchestras up till quite late were deciding for themselves. And even today they are. Often it's 441, 442. 441, 442, sorry. But in those days, a lot of times, orchestras played even at 432. And there's a guy in Belgium, I can't remember the name of the company, we'll flip it up, who makes a DAC where you can play all the music from 440 that you have as 432, and it just lowers the pitch. He believes it sounds better. He believes that psychologically there's a better thing because the algorithms or whatever work better at that point. Personally, I don't quite see it, but I'm told it's an extremely good DAC, and you can just choose what pitch you want to play, so that doesn't matter. But I just put it in as an aside. So you can hear the pitch is different, but also, did you notice that the first note, as I say, of that melody isn't quite as pronounced as it is in the 53 version? One more time, the 53 version. 1 second. Right, here we go. Let's go back. Listen to that. it's really clear, isn't it? The cellos are right in the front of the mix. And if we now move to the 77 version on my record, and this is a nice version. When we talk about albums, don't we? We don't really talk about LPs. And I know now we talk about vinyl, but we talk about albums. And someone's brought out a new album. Well, this is the reason why we call them albums, because in the old days, it took so many records to actually have one symphony on it that actually they put them into an album. And that kind of word stuck. But of course, this is just the box set. It's not really an album as such, but I just thought I'd put it in as an aside. Here is the 77 version. Whoops. You see, you wouldn't want me in your kitchen cooking away. I'd have everything so confused. Here we go, the 77 version. And I want you to listen to that very first note. We'll just pop this back. 1, 2, 3. All right. Listen. Do you hear? It's almost disappeared, or it's delayed. The first thing you hear actually are the violins, aren't they? Or let's just listen again. So, well, certainly the violas. Listen again. You see? It's almost like there's a note missing. It's interesting. And that's how most composers, conductors, conduct this work. They conduct it with that kind of opening. Simon Rattle, Bernard Haitink. It's interesting, but not all. But let's let it play through a bit more. Beethoven's such a genius for letting things grow. Come on. And now we have this wonderful melody and phrase. And this pressing is really good. There's no noise. The dynamic range on the vinyl is incredible. Well, I mean, you can listen to this at home in much better quality than just through a YouTube video from my listening room. But I think it's an interesting exercise. Now, Beethoven's Third Symphony is probably, I don't know if it's probably more famous for its second movement than it is for the first, because the second movement is indeed the movement of the funeral march. And this movement is so beautiful. It transforms into so many different moods and passions and all sorts of feelings of loss, of sadness. And then there's moments of euphoria in it where you're joy in the sadness, like you find often in flamenco or Portuguese pado. But let's just pop on the 77 version of beginning of the slow movement. Here we come. with the better recording techniques of 77, he could get a lot of bigger dynamic range. You can get more purity in the sound. But that really comes to a head in the 85 edition, which he recorded just a couple of years before he died. Slower. But this version, the 85 version, wasn't very critically acclaimed. The 63 version won the Grand Prix du Disque in Paris and was highly acclaimed, and to this day it's considered to be the version by many Beethoven lovers. But I don't know, I think this is worth a second visit. In fact, I've ordered the CD because I want to get the best quality I can. And he's taking this pace so nicely. It's a funeral. Isn't that subtle? Isn't that beautiful? And of course, there's so many great conductors. Now, let's see what happens when we come to the third movement. Now, typical third movement of a symphony, starting at the sort of allegro pace, lifting out from the second movement. Nicely building. The orchestra is just so perfectly in control. Now, the composition of this piece is, when you're listening to it, because it's so long, by the time you get to the end of the third movement, you could be forgiven for thinking that it's actually the end of the symphony itself. Because, let me just pop it onto the vinyl. In fact, this is a bit easier on the vinyl, because I can pop in here. Typical Beethoven. And 77, Karajan's going crazy. He's building, typical Beethoven phrase of building. Any reasonable person may think that's the end of the symphony, but it isn't. Beethoven decides to compose a finale. It is a fourth movement. It's often now, it was referred to as a finale. And it's actually, I can't say it's a way of showing off, but it's a way of the variation on the theme. And some experts say that he probably wrote this finale first and then worked back to the first movement and went through, because there are certain themes that go through all the way through. Have a listen here to the beginning of the finale. Here we go. think of the Ninth Symphony. You can see elements of where it comes from. He's sort of playing in the finale. You have no idea where it's going to go. You know it's going to go somewhere. And here we are, really back in a sort of classical phrase. And this is the genius of Beethoven. He's always taking you somewhere unexpected. But of course, there has to be an end. And the end for Beethoven of the finale is stupendous. And we're just going to bring that one back up. And here we come. Growling bass, which you've had since the beginning. I mean, that's Beethoven. That is the beginning of the Romantic period. There was nothing quite like it ever before, and you can see where he builds on. Well, I'm going to close this little talk with a little video of Herbert von Karajan conducting this symphony, just a little clip for you to show you. He was a bit of a showman. He loved the media and he loved, these beautiful films. But he created this aura, which I think we have to thank him for, even if he's not our first choice as interpreter of Beethoven's music. Well, if you have been, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next video. But until then, enjoy the music.